What's up, guys? Welcome back to another How to Beat Live Low Stakes Poker video. Today's video, we're going to talk about how to play poker on the flop, how to think about poker on the flop, and kind of created these slides with this kind of process map to make it incredibly simple for you guys. So let's get right into it. When we face an unknown villain, we'll check out of position. Why? For clarity. Our opponents are going to, on average, play very straightforward. They typically, I would say the majority of the time, are going to bet too often when checked to, especially when they're in position. They're not going to bet in a polar enough manner, meaning they're, in theory, they probably should be betting like really good hands for the most part, and then a lot of their bluffs that don't really benefit from checking back. And then a lot of the combos that are in the middle of their range that a lot of you guys are stabbing with. Let's use an example. Let's say on 10-7-3 two-tone, so 10-7-3 with a suit or a flush draw that's possible. A lot of you guys will bet a hand like 7-6 or pocket eights. A lot of the middling stuff that might have some showdown value that can't withstand a check raise. And so when that happens, you become very vulnerable to, check raises, an aggressive player that can exploit you. So when we go back to kind of flipping this scenario to the original scenario, if you will, when we are out of position, we do want to check to unknown villains because we're going to be able to find out pretty much exactly where we're at in the hand in a live low stakes game based on their either bet or their check or their sizing essentially when they do bet. So let's talk about when they bet. Typically, if they bet larger, I would say 2/3 or more, they are going to feel pretty good about their hand. They're going to usually be a little bit higher up in their range. It doesn't mean that it's always a hand that's top of range, but a lot of the time they're really going to like their hand. It's a hand that they're not going to typically fold to check raise that often. Could fold to like a massive check raise, which we talk about over at Arch City Poker using more of those. But your opponent, and it's probably not anything revolutionary here. It's not rocket science. If your opponent's bet larger, they really like their hand. Now, if they bet smaller, let's say they start getting closer to around half pot or less, especially if it's less than half pot, then typically, and again, it doesn't mean that they're always capped, but it does tend to be a little bit of a cap range. It tends to be a hand that your opponent is saying, you know what, I like my hand, but I don't really love it. I would love to just take down the pot now. I would love to see where I'm at in the hand. You see when a lot of people lead, or when a lot of players lead into you from out of position, they'll say things like, well, I just want to see where I'm at. And betting just to obtain information is a massive mistake in poker. Good players will take advantage of that all day. They will essentially react in a manner that, like if I have an opponent that bets to see where they're at, I'm basically going to give them false information. I'm going to raise them when I'm bluffing a lot, and I'm just going to call a lot more often and slow play bigger hands because it keeps them involved with the hands that just want to, quote, see where they're at. A lot of one pair hands, maybe some marginal draws, if you will. But yeah, when we are out of position, guys, we want to gain that clarity, have that clairvoyance before we start making really aggressive actions. And, if our opponents are going to make more mistakes when they're checked to as opposed to when they're facing a bet, then of course we want to check to them. So we're going to check raise against large bets with a pretty narrow range, like hands that are pushing enough equity that they feel comfortable playing for stacks with. Could be your real high equity draws, and then obviously, depending on how much money is behind, it could be like your two pairs or better, or it could be your over pairs or top pair, top kicker or better. But again, stack sizes will dictate that. The deeper you are, the better the hand that you need to be able to commit that much money with that early in the hand. If your opponent uses a smaller sizing, we're going to open up our range. We're going to start using more of like the middling to lower equity draws, whether it's just kind of like weaker flush draws. You could use something like a non-nut open-ender, more of our gutters. You could use also like some weak pair blockers or like pairs that you make like on that 10-7-3. You could take a hand like ace-3 with a backdoor flush draw. You can use that hand to check raise with. But yeah, if our opponent goes with a smaller sizing, we're going to check raise wider. If our opponent goes with a larger sizing, we're going to check raise a little narrower, and we'll call with hands that have good showdown value, like a lot of our best one pair hands. And then against that larger sizing, we'll call with some of like the middling to weaker draws as well. Not the gutters, but more of like the open-enders and weaker flush draws as well. Now, what if our opponent doesn't bet? So it's, obviously we can see here we're facing an unknown villain. We check out of position. Again, why? To gain clarity, to gain clairvoyance. If our opponent checks behind, typically that's also where they make a massive mistake facing a check, is that they don't bet with, or they don't check back, with enough balance. Like they don't check back enough top pair or even better hands enough of the time. They don't check back really nutty high equity draws. So when they do check back, they're very capped. You can very likely play a perfect 2-street game moving forward to turn and river. So yeah, when we face an unknown villain, guys, we want to check out of position, see what they do, and then we have a really good plan in place to attack accordingly based on what their action in fact is. Now, if we go to the next kind of player, when we face an aggressive opponent, what do we want to do when we're out of position? Well, we want to check. Again, why? These guys are stabbers. They are overly aggressive. They're going to bet too often when check to because, of course, in live low to mid stakes games, most of the time, yes, when an opponent checks, they are capped and they are telling you that they're weaker. So you should be betting more often. But against somebody such as yourself that's going to take the Arch City Poker style of play, if you will, or just not even our style of play, but being able to have some balance and being able to show up with good hands when you check, we're going to be able to aggressively exploit these kind of players when they stab like this. And again, if they go larger in the live low to mid stakes games, typically they do have a hand that's probably pushing more equity. With the more aggressive players, especially the more maniacal players, they could be wider, so you could expand upon your check raising range a little bit more. And for example, like with the passive opponent, if we're going to check raise wider against a smaller sizing, we probably could take some of those hands in that range, like the more marginal draws, maybe more of our best over pairs or one pair hands that might be a little thin against an unknown or like more of a passive opponent to check raise with. We probably can get more aggressive and go for thinner value against the more aggressive opponent. The thing is, guys, the aggressive guys are looking for the exact information that we're giving them here. Like pretty much what happens is when they stab and they stab too often, and I'm going to show you guys when we flip the situation to where when we're in position, we're going to be pretty much betting range a lot of the time as well, for the very reason that when our opponents check, they typically are weak and they're not balancing enough check raises in their range. So yeah, when these guys, these really aggressive opponents, we want to check to them out of position because, again, it is kind of for clairvoyance, but we're also going to exploit their tendency to overstab in these spots. And so you do want to expand upon your check raise range, even if it's a larger sizing. If it is a more medium to smaller size raise, then we want to definitely check raise even wider than we were against the unknown opponent. Again, we want to use all the marginal draws that we can. We want to use some of those weak pair blockers, like on 10-7-3, like I said, guys, you could use a hand like all the 3X hands, especially if they have a backdoor flush draw. They feel comfortable check raising if you have those. You could take some, I would take even some of your over cards that have like a backdoor flush draw. So let's say you had king, queen on that 10-7-3. Yep, it's technically air, but you have 6 outs to the best top pair a lot of the time. You have backdoor straight draw outs. You have backdoor flush draw outs as well. So that's where I would start to expand upon my range if I'm going to check raise more air against these aggressive opponents. And look, guys, if they're stabbing like most all of their range there's an argument that we can take really any combo we want and just check raise them. So you can see how within these slides, this process map, if you will, that there is a lot of room for, I would say, yeah, like room for you to improvise. You want to stick to kind of a baseline strategy where, yeah, if we face an unknown opponent, we're going to react to his sizing first. And then if he doesn't bet at all and he checks back, then we know that he's very capped and we can attack very liberally moving forward on turn and river. But against an aggressive opponent, they're probably going to stab way more often than even the unknown opponent in a live low stakes game. So we want to open up our range and check raise these guys a lot. If we do have a lot of hands that have good showdown value, we're going to check call, obviously, all of those as well. And so guys, like on the 10-7-3, just give an example, like we don't have to take like a weaker 10x hand and check raise that. We don't have to take 9s, 8s, or even like some of the 7x hands, pocket 6s or 5s. Like we can check call see what he does on the turn. You're going to have to get a little bit sticky, and we're not going to talk about the turn today. This is just a flop video, of course. We'll get to that on later videos on this platform. But yeah, I mean, we really want to take more of our range and get more aggressive against the aggressive players. We're going to fight fire with fire, so to speak, against these guys in these spots. Moving on to, yeah, of course, if we face a passive villain. So this one's a little bit different. Now, I will say, disclaimer, if you just want to check range against everybody and see what they do, that's not a bad strategy at all. That's a really good strategy. It's one way to simplify the strategy and not have you guys having to think, do I check or do I bet in a spot? Like when we're out of position, if you don't feel comfortable using kind of a mixed strategy, both Tony and I at Arch City Poker, we would highly recommend that you stick to like a one strat or like a one action type of strategy, if you will. Check range out of position, just stick to that. But if you feel comfortable going with a mixed strategy here against like a passive opponent, somebody who's not going to actually stab as often, like they're just not going to like probably bluff enough in position. They're not going to bet for value thinly enough. Like maybe they do check back like some of the middling pairs kind of correctly a lot of the time. Like some of the middling hands that are on that 10-7-3, like if they're checking back a lot of 9s, a lot of 8s, a lot of 7x, if they're checking back like some big 8x hands, like some hands that just have like some pretty good showdown value that don't need to bet, that don't want to face a check raise, then we're going to want to start betting from out of position as an exploit. Why? Because these guys actually make mistakes in the form of calling mistakes. They're going to make more mistakes facing a bet than they are facing a check. So we are going to take this strategy and be more exploitative. We want to start betting in a manner where we are using our hands that make sense to bet for value. So it could be like our top pair or better. If you think they make more calling mistakes over the entirety of their range, like on 10-7-3, or they go to call with pocket deuces against one bet, then yeah, you could even size down in that spot with some of like your more marginal pairs, like your 7x hands, to make sure they stay involved with worse pairs. Like if you bet pot here on 10-7-3 with a hand like pocket fives, that's a huge mistake. You're only going to get them generally to continue with the kind of equity that's doing really well against pocket fives. But it is a good spot to start betting. You can start sizing up if you want with the better hands in your range, of course, and then the really high equity draws. If you want to, again, keep this really simple and go with just one sizing strategy when you are deciding to bet out of position against the passive opponent, then you can go a little smaller. You can go like 40% pot with everything. And that's a good sizing as far as it'll keep them in with worse, like weaker hands, but it also still invites them to raise with their better hands. We're looking to get them to react truthfully to what they're doing, and they're going to do that against that sizing. So I would recommend something like 40% pot if we are going to bet against a passive opponent who, again, is going to make more mistakes in the form of calling mistakes. They're going to make more mistakes facing a bet than they will facing a check. Unlike our two other player types where it's the unknown, like you've never played with the player before, or you just don't think you have enough of a sample size to correctly label them, then you're going to want to check to that unknown player. Again, for clairvoyance, you're going to want to check to the aggressive villain because they are habitual stabbers. They're going to stab way too often. We attack them with more check raises. They'll make more mistakes facing a check. Moving on to the next type of player, really the same player, but now we're in position. Guys, when we face an unknown and now we're in position, we want to bet in position, bet range for smaller. Why? Again, guys, clarity. If we go somewhere between third pot and say 40% pot, then our opponent, once again, is going to react pretty much with pure truth. They are, and this is mostly the case on, I would say, more dynamic boards, wetter boards, so like boards that have straight draws or flush draws that can come in. The more static boards, you got to be careful. They can slow play a little bit on those because they are going to operate based on fear. Like they don't want to get sucked out on, so they're going to check raise all their good hands against 40% pot, especially on the dynamic and or wet boards. But on like the more static boards, like let's say Queen 7 Deuce Rainbow instead of the 10-7-3 with a suit that we were using, throughout this whole video here. But let's say it is like a Queen 7 Deuce Rainbow, no straight draws, no flush draws, very static board. They're going to have more check calls in their range with top pair, with better than top pair, because they know they can hide it. They know they can slow play it without having to worry about any of the runouts. Typically, though, especially if you're deeper. Your opponents are going to want to play for more money, and mostly 99% of the time, mostly just out of fear. They don't want to get sucked out on. If you're one of these players and you think to yourself, I need to put more money in the pot now so I can protect my hand and get him to fold. Like I want him to fold his draws, or I want him to fold weaker hands in his range. You're thinking about the game in a wrong way. A lot of the time, you want your opponents to call and continue because you're going to make more money from more parts of the range, and you're going to get them either off the hand later on turn or river, or if you're value betting, obviously you're going to get more value out of them later in the hand. But these opponents that they're so worried about getting sucked down and they feel good about just taking down the pot now. That's not how you play poker. You're not maximizing your maximizing equity realization, if you will. Like you're not going to win the most money that you can. So that's definitely a mistake where I see a lot of players. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see them make is just operating out of fear. But yeah, so the majority of the time, guys, the vast majority of the time, you're going to want to bet your range in position against an unknown opponent. No matter the board for the most part. I mean, if it's a more static board, you can go with a mixed strategy if you feel comfortable with this. If you don't, I want you to go with a one sizing strategy on the static board and just bet really large. You can bet pot or even larger. Use like top pair, top kicker or better, and then your bluffs are going to come from if there is potential to have a gutter or some kind of draw, if there is one. But let's say you're on that queen seven deuce, and it's like, Nick, there aren't any natural draws on that board. Okay, what's the kind of hand that's higher up in the range that we would want to fold? Maybe like a hand that they have that matches up with that board. Well, you would start with the pair blockers. Well, obviously, betting a queen is not bluffing. You're either value betting or you're value cutting yourself if you have a weak queen and you bet too large, right? That's why we would want to bet probably our ace queen or better. If it's against a limp caller, we could probably bet our king queen or better because they're probably not limp calling with ace queen or king queen. But you would start with the 7 and the deuce. Say you have a 7, like a 7-6 suited, a 7-5 suited. A7 has a little bit more showdown value with that good kicker. So let's say you take your worst kickers, you have 8-7 or 7-6 suited. You can start bluffing with those because 1, they block sets. 2, yes, they have showdown value, but if you get your opponent to fold a better pocket pair or just better pair in general by the time you get to the turn and or river, that's a huge win. The deuce in that hand, the lowest pair on the board. So you got queen 7 deuce again, guys. Ace deuce suited. Not going to have a lot of deuce X hands, but let's say we have ace deuce suited. That would be one of your best bluffing candidates as well. Other ones would be if you do have a backdoor flush draw, backdoor straight draw. So like let's say king jack suited, you have that queen 7 deuce rainbow texture. The king and the jack in your hand will block king, queen, and queen jack that your opponent can have. And if they do continue, you have outs to a lot of times the best top pair. You have backdoor outs in the form of straight draw or flush draw that you either can continue barreling with, or you can check back if you don't think you have the fold equity and you can see a free river and then possibly have a very disguised backdoor nutted kind of hand. So that's a really good scenario as well. So yeah, there are definitely ways that you can build your range on those static boards. That's the only kind of board that there has to be any kind of real strategy on, guys. Now, again, if you feel that you're comfortable and you want to mix your strategy on the static board in this spot, again, facing an unknown opponent when you're in position, he checks to you. You're 99% of the time, 100% of the time, probably going to be the pre-flop aggressor. Then you are wanting to use a smaller sizing with more of your range as well if you want to target some of the weaker parts of the range. Let's say I have queen 9 suited on the queen 7 deuce. And I feel that if I bet a little bit over pot, that's only going to get me called by like better queen X hands or like sets. And it's just going to fold like out pocket 8s. Why would I want to fold out pocket 8s with queen 9? I'm so far ahead of that hand. I want to get some value from that hand. You could, again, just check back and bet really large with the range that I suggested just a few minutes ago. Or you could bet something like quarter pot and you keep your opponent involved with more of their range. And they're going to play usually, again, pretty straightforward versus a really small sizing. They might have some slow plays, but again, you're just going to bet turn again when check 2. If they check raise you, that's a massively underbluffed line. One of the most underbluffed lines in live low stakes poker is when you face the turn check raise. So they're going to allow us no matter what we do to play perfect poker, guys. Now, if it is a dynamic board, if it is that 10-7-3 where there are multiple straight draws available, there is a flush draw available, that is a board, and I should also mention multiple over cards that can come that can bring better top pair, better two pairs, better sets. Basically a dynamic board. More than half of the runouts are going to change the nuts, essentially, guys. If it's that kind of board, you are wanting to go ahead and bet somewhere between third pot and 40% pot or so. The highest I would ever go if you're deeper is you can get up to half pot, but never go above that. Reason for that, guys, is that the smaller sizing is going to get them to continue with weaker parts of the range, and it's also still going to invite them to 99% of the time or more fast play the top end of their range. So you are going to be able to play perfect poker not only on the flop, but moving forward on the turn and river, because if you just get called, you know that they're capped, and you know exactly what kind of line or sizings that you want to use on future streets to be able to target the type of hand that they have in their range. If they check raise you on the flop, obviously we're going to make a lot of big exploitative folds because we know they're usually like kind of top of range. If it's a more aggressive opponent, we'll get to that in a minute, then it will be a little bit different how we go about our strategy. But against the unknowns, we're going to bet in position and we're going to bet range. Now on the static board, like I said, we would check back a lot of our range unless it's just the top end and then some of the bluffs on the queen seven deuce if you want to use just one sizing, but you can mix in a smaller sizing and then you can bet the rest of your range. So you still can bet range no matter the board in position, guys, against an unknown opponent. Facing an aggressive opponent, this one's a little different. We are going to bet what's known as polarized in position, meaning top of range and kind of like bottom of range that makes sense as a bluff. Why? To be able to realize equity. Against aggressive opponents, we're going to be facing more check raises. Now, aggressive could be bad or good. It could be a maniac who just check raises everything. It could be somebody such as myself that understands how to play the game from out of position. So it could be a really good thinking player. It could be a professional, if you will. They're going to look to check raise you in these spots if you're betting too many hands. We talked about that when we reversed the strategy earlier in this video, where when we're out of position, we check to the aggressive opponents because they're stabbing too often. We can attack them and exploit them with check raises. So we're going to make sure that we avoid that against a known aggressive opponent. We're going to bet basically like top pair or better, and maybe even like top pair and like second best kicker or better. We want to make sure we check back with some top pair hands against these guys, because when you check back, what's going to happen is they're going to think that you're rightfully so capped and that you're weaker, and they're going to think that they can just go bet, turn, barrel, river to get you off of your range. So you got to make sure you add in some draws and some top pair hands. If it's a more static texture, you could slow play a hand like top set because you do block top pair. That's the most likely hand that's going to pay you over 3 streets. So in these spots, I will check back some top set as long as we're not too deep. If you're too deep, you got to bet, because if you check back with the nuts and you make it to where you're not going to play a 3-street game and you can't play for stacks, you have made a significant error. But if you guys are shallow enough, if the SPR is 4 or less, you could check back more sets or 2 pairs that aren't really that vulnerable, trying to take advantage of an aggressive opponent that's going to try to barrel you off of your range later in the hand. But yeah, bet polarized in position, guys. Bet the top end of your range. Bet bluffs. Everything else that's kind of middling, like you have a middling kind of draw, a hand that benefits from checking back, like over cards with a backdoor flush draw or straight draw. You have middling second, third, and fourth pairs. Those are hands that are going to want to check back more often against this type of opponent. Last but not least, we face a passive opponent. Very similar to the unknown opponent, guys. We're going to bet in position, but this time, why? It's not so much to gain clarity. It's part of that, but these guys, again, make calling mistakes. So you can size accordingly, but for the most part, you can just, again, keep it simple, go with a smaller sizing, bet your range, and these guys are going to call with a cap range, and they're typically going to check raise with top of range, and it's not going to be very balanced. They're going to allow you to play perfect poker in position. So I know we took more time on the unknown. Passive villains kind of fall into that unknown category, guys. Like the vast majority of your live, low to mid-stakes opponents are going to be too passive on average. They will stab when checked to when they're in position, but typically they're going to play pretty straightforward. They're going to let you know where they're in the hand based on their sizings and how often they do or do not bet in certain spots. So on the flop, this is a really simple kind of process map for you guys that are struggling. If you don't know what to do, like you constantly ask yourself, or you just admit to yourself out loud or to your buddies that you play poker with, or to somebody that you respect as a player that I'm not sure how much to bet in the spot, or I don't know what to do in the spot, this is a really good starting point for you guys on the flop. It's based on the 3 pretty much main type of opponents you're going to run into. Again, if it's an unknown, just the vast majority of live low stakes opponents you play against, we're either going to check range out of position or we're going to bet range in position. And then we have a really good strategy moving forward facing whatever they do based on their sizings and or their it's either their over aggression or most of the time their lack of aggression. So if you guys have any comments or questions or comments rather, go ahead and let me know. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, visit us over at archcitypoker.com where you will get much more in-depth content related to this exact kind of strategy. So I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks.